What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you my upset alert games heading into week number 2 of the 2025 college football season. Going back to my upset alert video from last week in week 1, 4 out of the 8 games turned out to be upsets in my upset alert video from last week. Yeah, that was a lot of upsets that did happen, so it was a chaotic weekend last weekend. Looking at those upset alert games that did happen on my list of those 8 games. We had South Florida upset Boise State, of course. That one was on Thursday night. That one didn't really surprise me that much. Clemson getting upset by LSU didn't really surprise me much either. Miami upsetting Notre Dame didn't really surprise me, but the one upset that everybody keeps not talking about is pretty much, Florida State upsetting Alabama. Everybody cannot stop talking about it. And also, it was one of the biggest shocking upsets, I think, in college football history for quite some time. Of course, we had Vanderbilt and Alabama last year, but this was definitely even more surprising because you don't expect Alabama to lose a season opener game, and it's the first time since 2007 since they lost a season opener game against a non-conference opponent. So going into week 2, can we have more upsets for this weekend? It's not typically a big weekend in college football. Yeah, there are some big games here and there, but you got mostly teams that, were like 4 top 10 matchups playing like, cupcake opponents. So, yeah, there's not really a lot of big games this weekend, but going into week 2, nonetheless, it should be a pretty exciting weekend of college football as we get to watch it every single week by week on Saturdays. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Again, we're picking out the 8 games total, 4 games each. 4 games that are least likely to be upsets, and then 4 games that are most likely to be upsets. And whoever that team is on upset alert, whoever is favored, that team is on upset alert. So let's jump right into it. We'll go from the least likely and work our way to the most likely upsets. And we start here with a state of Florida battle. We got South Florida at Florida. This one will be at 4:15 Eastern Time on the SEC Network. Florida is favored by 17.5 in this one, which doesn't really surprise me at all. But you look at this South Florida team. I talked about them just a moment ago. They're coming off a big upset, of course, against Boise State this past Thursday. So they had a lot of time to prepare for this game. They got some time, to kind of quickly study what Florida was like, pretty much since Thursday night. So they've had a lot of time to get ready for this game. But you look at Florida, they definitely look like they're going to be a pretty good team this year. I mean, not saying they are not going to be a great team just yet, because we still need 4 games to kind of figure out what these teams are going to be like. I don't really see an upset happening here, but you never know. South Florida coming off a big upset this past Thursday. Can they do it again for the second week in a row? I don't know. Florida looked pretty good last week, and DJ Lagley is going to be a pretty tough quarterback to stop. But South Florida's got an offense that definitely, I think, can get past this Florida defense. And South Florida's also got a quarterback that can run the football. So how well can the Gators contain that? We'll see what happens here. But again, Florida is favored by 17.5, which doesn't really surprise me a lot. And I don't really expect an upset here to happen because of that spread, and then also how big the spread is. Next up, we got Ole Miss and Kentucky. So speaking of the SEC, this one's at 3:30 Eastern Time on ABC. Ole Miss is favored by 10.5 here, which also doesn't really shock me either. You got Ole Miss that's coming in after a beatdown against Georgia State last week. They did put up a lot of points in that game, and that really didn't really decide which. That's not a game that we don't really know much about Ole Miss yet. This game will kind of give us an early season feel to the Rebels because into the offseason I talked about Ole Miss losing a lot of pieces on defense, and it's going to really matter in this game, in my opinion. So And Austin Simmons didn't look great last week. Yeah, he put up big numbers, but he threw a couple of interceptions, so made a couple of mistakes, and if he continues to make those mistakes, this could be a really bad game here for Ole Miss. And you look at Kentucky, they're coming off a win against Toledo. I actually had them on upset alert last week. Well, this time I got them here as the underdog, potentially probably pulling off an upset here against the Ole Miss Rebels. And yeah, Kentucky beat Ole Miss last year. Remember, they beat them on the road. This time they get them at home here in Lexington. But this will be a big revenge game here for Ole Miss. I think Lane Kiffin will have his players ready to go. Again, Kentucky, it's really about their offense. Can they really run the football in this game and, waste the clock down? Because I think it's also going to come down to Zach Gazelda and see how consistent he'll be, because he wasn't really that accurate against Toledo. We'll see what happens here, though. Again, Kentucky definitely has a really good shot here to pull off the upset, in my opinion. And, the last 4 meetings here between these two teams, they've all been decided by one possession, and I think it will be like that again this weekend. So, again, I think Kentucky definitely could pull off an upset here, but this is like a least likely upset of our game, in my opinion. Next up, we have Arizona State at Mississippi State. This one's at 7:30 Eastern Time on ESPN2. Sun Devils favored by 6.5, over and under at 59.5. So we're kind of expecting some points to be scored in this game. Arizona State's coming off a 38-19 win, of course, over Northern Arizona last week, and then Mississippi State coming off a win against Southern Miss. So both of these teams scored the same amount of points from last week. They both got in the 30s, so I'm expecting this game to really go either way. It's a big revenge game here for the Bulldogs as well. The Cowbells will be rolling in this one. I think the crowd will be packed here, and it's also a night game, so it's technically going to be dawn when the game starts, but then it will turn into night, and those Cowbells will be rolling. So I wouldn't be surprised if Mississippi State did pull off an upset here. This is definitely going to be a really tough test here for Arizona State, in my opinion. So yeah, keep an eye on this game if you are an Arizona State fan, and then also a Mississippi State fan. Next up, we got Kansas at Missouri. I know rivalry in the Big 12. This one would be at 3:30 Eastern Time on ESPN2. Missouri is favored by 6.5. That kind of does surprise me a little bit. I was kind of expecting the spread to be at like 3.5 or maybe 2.5 points, because this is an old rivalry game. It's really going back to like the old Big 12. These two teams have not met each other since 2011. You look at Kansas, this team has played pretty good football in the first 2 weeks of the season. Of course, they did play a Week 0 game, so we can't really take much away from that game, but still, they beat a pretty good Fresno State team, who's a quality Group of 5 team, and then, of course, they're coming off a big win last week. Missouri, we haven't really learned much about them. I know their offense put up so many points against Central Arkansas. Defensively, I think they're going to have a pretty good defense. I talked about that in the offseason. So, yeah, this is kind of an early season test here for both of these teams, and it's also a game that I think could really go either way, and a game that also kind of, decides both teams' seasons. I think the winner of this game could probably be like a dark horse team in their respective conference, but I'm pretty excited to see this game back. It's an old Big 12 rivalry matchup, and, I'm expecting here to be a really good game in this one, and I think there's a lot of bad blood here between these two teams. So, yeah, put definitely Missouri on upset alert because they are favored, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Jayhawks did pull off an upset. So now we get into the games that are, most likely upsets to happen. First up, we got Illinois at Duke. This one will be at noon Eastern Time on ESPN. Illinois is favored by 3.5, and the over and under is at 49.5. So we're expecting pretty much a lowest scoring game here. Both of these teams coming off similar wins from last week. Illinois, of course, beating a cupcake opponent. They scored 52 points in their first game, and then Duke scored 45. So pretty similar wins. I think it's kind of like the Kansas and, Missouri game. It's a game that really decides both teams' seasons. I think the loser probably goes on to have like a pretty average season, and then the winner goes on to have like a pretty good year and becomes a dark horse team in their respective conference. Now, there is a lot of talk about Illinois being overrated. I mean, honestly, I was kind of, overrating them myself in the offseason. So we don't really know much about this Illinois team, and we also don't really know about this Duke team either. So yeah, this should be a pretty good game. It should be a competitive game. Again, I think it will be lowest scoring if I was going to make a prediction right now on this game. And you will see my game picks and predictions coming up tomorrow. So stay tuned for that video coming out tomorrow. We got my game picks and predictions as we went 5-5 last week, and I'll talk about a little bit more about this game when I do those predictions. So again, this one's at noon Eastern Time on ESPN. Illinois is favored by 3.5. Let's now go on to Iowa State and Iowa. This one will be at noon Eastern Time on Fox. So this is the big noon kickoff game on Fox. Iowa State's favored by 3.5. Over and under, surprisingly, is pretty low at 41.5. Well, I shouldn't really say surprisingly, because this game really does decide defenses, and it's it also seems like the away team always wins this game, and that's kind of been like that now for the last few years. The away team always wins this game, and it really kind of decides, both teams' seasons. But you got Iowa State. They've already played 2 games, and they've kind of looked pretty good in the first 2 weeks of the game. So, yeah, I've been really impressed with this Iowa State team. I think they've been the best team so far in the Big 12, even though Arizona State's also, a team that won last week. But I really like this team. I think Iowa State's definitely going to be like a top contender in the Big 12 based off of their first 2 games. For Iowa, on the other side, we don't really know much about this team just yet. We'll kind of give an early glimpse of this team, going into the weekend against this Iowa State team. It is a rivalry game. Anything can happen here in this one. Again, Iowa State's playing at home, and like I said, this game really does decide, the away team, and it's also really deciding of both defensive teams as well. And it's always a low-scoring battle, so I do expect the same thing to happen this weekend, unless Iowa State probably puts up a lot of points on the offensive side of the football. But either way, this should be a pretty good game. It's the big noon kickoff on Fox, and again, the Cyclones are favored by 3.5. I wouldn't be surprised if the Hawkeyes did pull off the upset here, but either way, it should be a pretty good game nonetheless. Next up, we have Baylor at SMU. This one's also at noon Eastern time on the CW network, so we probably won't be able to watch this game, but you got SMU that's favored by 2.5. SMU coming off a pretty easy win last week, and then you got a Baylor team that's coming off a Friday night loss last week to Auburn. Can they bounce back from last week's loss by a couple of touchdowns? Baylor looked pretty good on the offensive side of the football, but they were just in too big of a rush, and they also went for it on 4th down much in that game. So yeah, Baylor, if they be aggressive like they were against Auburn, I don't think they're going to win this game. But if they can, just stay consistent, pretty balanced on both sides of the football, then they might have a shot here to pull off an upset, in my opinion. But again, SMU, we don't really know much about them if they're a top 20 team. But this will kind of give us an early feel to the season for the Mustangs and see if they can get back to the ACC championship as well. And then finally, we got the game of the weekend. In my opinion, it's Michigan at Oklahoma. This one's at 7:30 Eastern time on ABC. Oklahoma's favored by 2.5, over and under at 46.5. It's not a surprise that Oklahoma's favored because they're playing at home, and obviously you've got a lot of pressure on this Michigan team with a freshman quarterback in Bryce Underwood. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Michigan's coach is suspended for this game due to the off-the-field issues for the Wolverines. That's been going on for the last couple of years. So yeah, a lot of pressure here on this Michigan team, I think, going into this weekend. Again, this is the biggest game of the weekend. I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan did win this one, but at the same time, you got Oklahoma that's coming in with a lot of hype, of course, possibly being an SEC dark horse team. They probably have to prove it in this game in order to, get my, decision to put them as a dark horse team in the SEC. But either way, John Mateer looked pretty good last week in his first start for Oklahoma, the transfer from Washington State. And like I said, I think it's going to come down to both defensive teams because the over and under is at 46.5. So it does come down to see which defense is a lot better. And that was what I talked about in the offseason. It really does come down to defenses. And then also quarterback trust. You got to trust John Mateer a little bit more than Bryce Underwood. And this will be, Bryce Underwood's first test in front of a hostile environment. So yeah, this game will be at 7:30 Eastern time. It will be a night game. And again, I think it is the game of the weekend. So the Sooners are favored by 2.5. So those are my upset alert games heading into week number 2 of the 2025 college football season. Who do you see getting upsetted this week? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.